Mercedes just won the race, and now they could be disqualified. Not for something obvious. Not for something anyone saw on track. For something the FIA found after everything was already over. And here's what makes this insane. The same Miami weekend had 9 separate sanctions, a disqualification over just 2 millimeters, and multiple penalties decided hours after the race ended. That means one thing. No result is safe anymore. And if the FIA really found irregularities on the Mercedes, then this isn't just a check. It's a potential championship-changing decision. Because this time, the winner might not stay the winner. At first, it didn't look like a Mercedes problem. It looked like dominance. Clean. Controlled. Almost effortless. Antonelli wins again. The team executes perfectly. Another race, another statement. On paper, everything made sense. Mercedes first. Russell strong in fourth. Total control of the championship momentum. But then, people started looking closer. Because something didn't quite add up. Not in the result. In how they got there. Think about the context. Every top team arrived in Miami pushing hard. Ferrari brought a massive upgrade package. McLaren showed clear improvements in race pace. Red Bull introduced changes trying to close the gap. And Mercedes? They brought almost nothing. One of the smallest update packages on the grid. And yet, they were still the fastest when it mattered most. That's unusual. Because Formula One doesn't work like that. Performance usually comes with visible evolution. New parts. New concepts. New gains. But here, the gains were there, without the visible changes. And that's where the questions begin. Not loud. Not public. But inside the paddock, very real. Because when one team finds performance others can't see, everyone starts asking the same thing. Where is it coming from? And more importantly, is it fully within the rules? Now, add another layer to this. Mercedes didn't just win. They won in a very specific way. Strategically perfect. Technically sharp. And almost too efficient at the key moment of the race. Lap 27. The undercut. One decision, and everything flipped. Antonelli pits. Comes out flying. Jumps ahead. Controls the race from that point forward. It looked perfect. But perfection in Formula One always gets analyzed. Because when something works that well, other teams don't just accept it. They study it. And sometimes, they question it. That's exactly what started happening after Miami. Not publicly. Not with headlines. But inside the technical discussions. Inside the FIA. Because the performance difference in that moment was just enough to raise eyebrows. Not enough to prove anything. But enough to investigate. And that's where things start to get uncomfortable. Because once the FIA begins to look deeper, they don't just check what's visible. They check everything. Dimensions. Systems. Behavior under different conditions. Every detail. And this is the part most people don't see. The race might be over. But the real scrutiny begins after. And for Mercedes, that scrutiny is now very real. Because when a team wins like this, without showing exactly how, it doesn't just create admiration. It creates suspicion. And in Formula One, suspicion is where every major controversy begins. And this is where the story takes a serious turn, because now it's no longer about performance. It's about legality. Once the FIA starts looking deeper, they're not asking how fast you are. They're asking why. Why does the car behave like this? Why does it gain time in specific phases of the race? Why does it perform under certain conditions better than expected? And most importantly, is every part of that performance actually allowed? Because Formula One isn't just about speed. It's about staying within an incredibly tight set of rules. Millimeters. Software behavior. Energy deployment. Everything is regulated. And Miami already showed how strict that system has become. A Red Bull car disqualified over 2 millimeters. Verstappen penalized for barely touching a line. Multiple drivers punished after the race ended. That's the level of precision we're dealing with. Now apply that same level of scrutiny to Mercedes. A team that just won again. A team that looks faster without obvious upgrades. A team that executed a race-winning move with almost perfect efficiency. If the FIA decides to inspect that closely, they're not looking for something big. They're looking for something small. Because in this sport, small is enough. And that's what makes this situation so tense. Because if they find even the slightest irregularity, something that doesn't match the regulations perfectly, then everything changes. Not just for that race. For the entire season. And here's where it becomes even more uncomfortable. Because history in Formula One has shown this pattern before. Teams push the limits. They find gray areas. They exploit interpretations. And sometimes, they go just a fraction too far. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to be questioned. And when that happens, the FIA steps in. Slowly at first. Quietly. But with one goal. To verify everything. Now think about what that means for Mercedes right now. They're leading. They're winning. They're under the spotlight. Which means every detail of that car is now being looked at differently. Not as a success story, but as a potential risk. And the most dangerous part? This doesn't happen instantly. There's no immediate answer. No clear resolution. Just tension. Waiting. Speculation inside the paddock. Because until the FIA confirms everything is legal, there's always a possibility. A possibility that something doesn't pass. And if that happens, it won't just be a technical issue. It will be a shock. Because a disqualification at this level doesn't just change one result. It rewrites the narrative. Suddenly, that dominant win becomes a question mark. Suddenly, that championship lead doesn't feel secure anymore. And suddenly, every other team starts believing they have a chance again. That's the real consequence. So now, the situation isn't just about what Mercedes did in Miami. It's about what the FIA decides next. Because right now, everything is still under review. And in Formula One, that's where the biggest stories begin. And now, we reach the point where everything starts to feel unstable. Because once an investigation reaches this level, it doesn't just stay technical. It becomes political. Not in the public sense, but inside the paddock, between teams, engineers, and the FIA. Because the moment one team suspects something, they don't stay silent. They ask questions. They request clarifications. They push for deeper inspections. And that pressure builds. Quietly, but constantly. Now think about the situation Mercedes is in. They're leading the championship. They've won every race so far. And they've done it while bringing fewer visible upgrades than anyone else. That combination is exactly what triggers attention. Because dominance without explanation is the fastest way to become a target. And in Formula One, once you become a target, every detail of your car is analyzed differently. Not as innovation, but as potential irregularity. Now here's where things get even more intense. Other teams don't need proof to act. They just need doubt. Because doubt is enough to start a process. A request to the FIA. A technical query. A demand for clarification on specific systems. And once that happens, the FIA is forced to respond. Not with opinions. With inspections. Deeper ones. More specific ones. Looking at areas that weren't even questioned before. That's how these situations escalate. Not with a big discovery, but with layers of pressure. And Mercedes is now right in the middle of that. Because if rivals believe there's something hidden, they will keep pushing until they find it. Or until the FIA confirms there's nothing there. But until that confirmation comes, the tension doesn't go away. It grows. And here's the part that changes everything. Because even if Mercedes is completely within the rules, the process itself can affect them. More inspections. More scrutiny. More limitations on how they operate. And sometimes, that alone is enough to slow a team down. Because when you're constantly being checked, you stop taking risks. You stop pushing the boundaries. You become more conservative. And in Formula One, that's dangerous. Because performance lives at the edge. So now Mercedes faces a different kind of challenge. Not just beating McLaren. Not just staying ahead of Red Bull. But surviving the spotlight. Because the spotlight in Formula One doesn't just reveal greatness. It exposes everything. And if there's even the smallest detail out of place, it won't stay hidden. So now the question isn't just whether Mercedes did something wrong. It's whether they can keep winning, while the entire paddock is watching them closer than ever. Because if Miami showed anything, it's that the FIA is no longer missing the smallest details. And when that level of scrutiny meets a team that dominates this clearly, there are only two possible outcomes. Either Mercedes proves everything is perfectly legal, and their dominance becomes undeniable. Or, one tiny detail changes everything, and the moment that looked like their strongest victory becomes the beginning of their biggest problem. And this is where everything finally comes together, because this situation was never really about one race. It's about what happens next. Because right now, Mercedes is standing in the most dangerous position in Formula One. At the top, winning, leading the championship, and under the microscope. And history tells us something very important about that combination. It never stays comfortable for long. Because the moment a team dominates like this, the sport reacts. Rivals push harder. The FIA looks closer. Every system, every component, every tiny detail gets questioned. Not once. Repeatedly. And that's exactly where Mercedes is now. Because after Miami, the conversation inside the paddock has changed. It's no longer just, Mercedes is fast. Now it's, How are they this fast? And that question is the beginning of every major turning point in Formula One. Because once that doubt exists, it doesn't go away. It grows. It spreads. It reaches the FIA, the engineers, the rival teams. Until eventually, it forces an answer. And that answer is what will define everything. Because if the FIA clears Mercedes completely, if every system, every measurement, every detail is proven legal, then something even bigger happens. Their dominance becomes undeniable, untouchable, because they won't just be the fastest team, they'll be the fastest team under maximum scrutiny. And that's when championships start slipping away from everyone else. But if the FIA finds something, anything, even the smallest irregularity, then everything flips. Instantly. Because we've already seen what tiny details can do. 2 millimeters, and a car is disqualified. A fraction of a line, and a world champion is penalized. Margins this small, deciding everything. And Mercedes is not operating far from that edge. No team is. That's the reality of Formula One. So now, everything comes down to one moment. One decision. One confirmation. Because until the FIA closes this completely, there's always a possibility. A possibility that the biggest winner of the weekend becomes the biggest story for a completely different reason. And that's why this matters more than it looks. Because this isn't just about Miami. It's about momentum, confidence, control of the championship. All of it, sitting on something that still hasn't been fully confirmed. So the real question isn't whether Mercedes was fast. It's whether that speed survives scrutiny. Because if it does, they become unstoppable. But if it doesn't, then Miami won't be remembered as their greatest victory. It will be remembered as the moment everything started to fall apart.